just checked Bard, which is the Google search engine. McDonald's has an annual turnover rate of 130%. So 130%. So let's not get stuck on this one. So what I'm saying is turnover rate is something that people don't understand when they're an anti-MLM critic. If you're a direct sales guy, you say, of course, people turn over. They turn over for a zillion reasons. The way it's sold, though, is that everyone can find two people. And everyone can find two people, and since they can do that, 2 by 2 by 2 or 5 by 5 by 5, and you're going to be rich. And that's the way it's sold. That's the argument he should have made. But the idea that it is a high turnover rate shows his level of incompetence. Here's the other point. You got people like a professor, like marketing professor William Keep, should have stopped him. Like, wait a minute, pal, you got the wrong argument. Doug Brooks, the attorney, Ponzinomics guy. These people. Ponzinomics is a financial analyst. They say, as far as his background, they should have stopped him in that argument and said, "Nope, you're close, but you're not right." So I'll just leave it at that. So let's move on to another point.
Yeah, let me just finish it real quick. My point is that the anti-MLMers assume that everybody tries when they join an MLM, and they don't. Okay, for whatever reason, maybe they do research, maybe they get rejected, maybe they change their mind, whatever the reason is, they quit. But again, that's just a symptom. That turnover rate is just a symptom. It's not the problem. So yeah, let's move on. There's another comment that Narco made here at the 18th minute. Fortunately, he was almost done because I think his speech was 18 or 19 minutes long. So towards the very end, he was talking about Bernie Madoff and how MLM is much worse than Bernie Madoff because, Bernie ripped off people for like $65 billion. Well, that $65 billion was sort of the early estimates. When they started digging down into the details of the books and the actual money that changed hands, the real figure, even though it's a large number, okay, I'm not saying it's insignificant, but instead of $65 billion, it was $17.5 billion. And so this is just a sign of Narco doing his quote unquote research. He skims something, he finds something, and he blabbers it out. He does not do in-depth research to see if that figure is something that people agreed on, or he just picked the first thing he saw and started talking about it. But that's Narco. He's like an MLMer that lies. He's the same thing on the other side. That's the problem I have with Narco when he starts spewing his BS, is he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he doesn't care if he's accurate. He just likes to be heard. He likes the attention. He wants the eyeballs on him. He wants the followers. He wants the bag, and facts really don't matter. And that's my point with that comment. So, Glenn, I'll let you, put in your piece.
Yes, Scott, I've just looked up Wikipedia. Wikipedia is saying it was 64.8 billion. That's what Wikipedia is saying, 64.8 billion. And I think it's interesting too. Marco makes a very good point about the MLM industry being far, far, far worse than Bernie Madoff. I think it's interesting. I like to draw the comparison of Bernie Madoff versus Dexter Yager. Now, Bernie Madoff, he ripped people off financially, agreed. He only targeted people that were wealthy who could afford to lose money. That doesn't make it right. But people like Dexter Yager, they would go after homeless people. They would go after people on the minimum wage. They would go after people who they knew couldn't afford it. And not only would they do that, they would tell them things like, don't let anybody steal your dream. He even wrote a book about that, which is just a paranoid, how to describe it? It's just a paranoid, illogical fear that everybody that you meet is going to be jealous of you and your new Amway business. They're going to try and sabotage you. Completely paranoid, completely ridiculous. Dexter Yager knew it was garbage, but he knew that he needed to keep people away from people that had facts about the company. So he would actually encourage people to stop talking to members of their own family, to stop talking to their own friends, facts, and data about the Amway Corporation. What Dexter Yager did was far, far worse than what Bernie Madoff did, and yet Dexter Yager's got no Wikipedia page. You guys had seen Munger, who again I think made the greatest ever MLM video in the history of YouTube about the tool scam, and he was in disbelief that Dexter Yager doesn't have a Wikipedia page because the amount of not just financial damage that Dexter Yager did to people, but to relationships between people's friends and their family. He was telling people, don't talk to your son, don't talk to your daughter because they're negative, they're losers, they're sabotaging you. It's absolutely obscene what he did. So to me, yeah, Marco was absolutely spot on. Bernie Madoff is nowhere near as bad as these MLM companies and these fake gurus who tell people to stop associating with people who talk ill of the companies. So yeah, I'm with Marco on this one 100% when it comes to Bernie Madoff.
And I think, Scott, was your comparison about the dollar amount, or was it about the whole Bernie Madoff was better than MLM or worse than MLM?
Well, my point was that the real dollars that were lost were much less than what Narco put out. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia right now.
Wikipedia's saying $64.8 billion.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and both of those sources were from, I think it was 2009 and 2010. So those were the early days. Those were the figures that came out. But when they dug into the details, and go ahead and Google and find a variety of sources. Don't just look at Wikipedia and assume it's correct because every source is slanted. Go and look at multiple sources and see what it comes out to be, because what they realized was a large part of that $65 billion was money that Madoff just made up, right? He made up profits. We know that. That's the whole idea of a Ponzi scheme is you're telling people, hey, look at all this money you're making. And it was on paper, but it was never real dollars that were given to him. And so the real money was more like $17.5 billion, not $65 billion. And those sources where that $64.8 billion came from was the very early days. If you look at it's the third and fourth reference, you'll see the notes on that number. And those are the very early, and I couldn't quote you the source that I found before, but I did, like I usually do, I went and looked at multiple sources over different years from different, media sources, because that's what I always do. I don't ever just take the word of one source and say, that's it. I look behind it. I say, okay, who said that? When did it come from? Did they have their own motive for doing that? And let's see what some other people are saying, maybe later on in the process.
You're saying this, so he invested, you're saying 17. So you're saying 17 billion, correct?
That's the source that I found.
Okay, so how much was it? Sorry, exactly.
It was around $17.5 billion.
Okay, so what you're basically saying is this: if a person invested $17.5 million, and they thought, and Bernie was telling them they turned $17.5 million, and then 15 years later they had $64.8 billion.
What Scott is saying is the initial results of the Bernie Madoff Ponzi was $65 billion.
Yeah. But
by the time it was shook out, it was smaller than that $17.5 billion. Is what
because you're looking at money lost. But
I think the total scam.
We
could do some research. We can do some research.
Let me finish my point. So I think what Scott's saying, and he's half right, but he's half wrong. He's saying that person invested $17.5 million. They then thought they had $64.8 million. And they would have budgeted for that, and they would have spent their money according to that, having the 64.8. So Bernie was telling them, you have this much money with me, 64.8 million, but because all the money was fake, they in effect only had 17.5. So you could argue that I've only lost 17.5 million because that's what they invested. But it gets worse than that because they would have been spending money elsewhere thinking that they had 64.8 million, which means they would have done things like mortgaged houses and bought cars that they wouldn't have done if they had have known they only had 17.5 million. Therefore, I think it's accurate to say if Bernie's saying you have 64.8 million invested with me when he knew they didn't, it's fair to say that he had actually deceived you of 64.8 million, not 17.5, which is what you invested, because he was deliberately telling you you had this figure when you didn't.
Well, and that was really what caused the whole Ponzi to fall apart, was some of these rich people started asking for some of their money back during the 2007, 2008 economic downturn, and it didn't take very long at all for Bernie to say, I don't really have that money. It never existed. Now, let me just make a note here. On the same Wikipedia page, about a third of the way down, it says Aaron Avelland, who publicly questioned Madoff's reported investment performance in 2001, stated that the actual amount of the fraud might never be known, but was likely between 12 and 20 billion. And there's three sources here, or three footnotes. It's 116, 117, and 118. And those sources are, let me scroll down here just to find them. 116 was written in 2001. 117 was 2009, and the other one was 2009 also. So now these are all early publications. I thought it took a few years to come up with these numbers, but apparently at least one guy had it figured out early on. But there was other sources that said 65 billion. But you can see that right on the Wikipedia page that there's challenge to that 65 billion, to that number.
I think Marco's
and that's
right.
my point.
So let's do this.
If Marco's right, if my stockbroker sends me a letter and says to me, investor with me, and this is in 2007, you have $64.8 million. That's what you have, and that's what you have. And then it turns out a year and a half later that it's only 17.5, which is what I invested. I haven't been robbed of 17.5 million. I've been robbed of 64.8 million. Because I have a legal letter telling me this is mine, and then I don't. So he's absolute. Yeah, because you've made financial decisions thinking your money's going up.
Well, there were actually people that made money from Madoff because they put money in and then they withdrew their profits, even though they were fake profits. They withdrew them before the whole thing cratered. There was one guy, I think, in Europe who made like $1 or $2 billion from his investment, and then when the FTC came knocking and said, "Hey, this is clawback time. You know, this was a Ponzi, and you made a profit from Bernie, but now you have to pay it back because it wasn't real money. It was really money that came from other people that gave money to Bernie, and they never made a return back, and you did." Well, this guy committed suicide. That was in the news. I remember that clearly in the news. He was found at the bottom of a swimming pool. I guess he just lost his balance and, didn't put his little flippers on or something. But to me, he committed suicide. There's not much doubt in my mind on what actually happened. But those are things that really happen when people withdraw their money early enough. They can actually get their money and the profits. But then it's the later people, when they ask for their money, Bernie says, it's not there. It doesn't exist. I don't have it. So,
So let's do this. Let's not get stuck on a very trivial part. It's the idea that Marco did some research. There's controversy about the research. To me, I'm going to throw a neutral flag on that one argument, because you can find legitimate research, like Scott said, from 17 to 20. You can find a lot of people that regurgitated that 64 or $60 billion. Every newspaper article just regurgitates the same thing. They're all owned by, a small number of companies. We only have about 10 minutes left. I just want to bring one thing up. Marco constantly poo-poos direct selling as not being a viable, effective business model. If you go do some research, again, you can go to Google and do some research. I found it says direct selling is a business model in which I asked this question, is direct selling trending up or trending down? Direct selling is a business model in which independent salespeople sell products directly to consumers. Like I've said before, direct sales goes to them. They come to you as retail. So there we go. Often through home parties and online. In 2023, direct selling is ranked as the 20th largest private employer. So if you pull them all together, there'd be 16 million direct sellers. So the idea that direct selling is dead is just flat out wrong.
No one's direct selling, though. They're fake direct sellers. They're like Amway and Herbalife. They're classified as direct sellers, but nobody's direct selling. If there was that many direct sellers,
it depends on your definition of direct selling.
All the time.
We've been here. But direct selling is not just door to door. Direct selling is direct to consumers.
Well, so phone calls. I don't get any phone calls from direct sellers.
Well, there's a lot of blurring of the.
Just because
There's a lot of blurring of the lines between direct selling and MLM. The DSA represents mostly MLMs, so there's a lot of hocus pocus going on. When people say the word direct selling, they're actually talking about MLMs. And to me, those are two distinct different business models, but they get muddled up all the time. The DSA also talks about, $30 billion of retail sales in the United States. Well, most of those $30 billion were from MLMs, not from direct selling companies. And so that's why it's so important to get your definitions straight, because these people like to play with the language and mix words together and mix meanings. And you really have to be careful, when you throw terms around that you're talking about the same thing. So that's my, and by the way, I just happened to find this story. The guy's name was Jeffrey Picower, Picower. He apparently made $5.1 billion from Madoff's Ponzi because he withdrew the money before it cratered. It was still available. Anyway, I just wanted to
people
put that in there.
Highly skilled salespeople like Peter, who used to do direct sales to actual consumers, there are very, very few of them around. What there are millions of are people who are pretending to be direct sellers, who are not directly selling any products to anybody, but who are instead promising people that they can make them become multi-millionaires. That's what there is. They're not direct sellers. Direct sales is finished. It's pretty much gone. There's not skilled salesmen like Peter going around anymore. What we have is people hiding behind direct selling because direct selling is legal. Marco's right. Direct selling is gone, and it's ridiculous that they're saying that there's direct selling.
You also have to kind of figure out what is the goal of the direct salesperson. The direct salesperson could be the one who's kind of selling their friends, their neighbors, their whatever for part-time income. That has always been a very strong part of direct sales. You're bringing up the point, contributing that Marco's right about something. It's when direct selling is described wrong. Not all direct sellers say that you're going to become lifestyle, the rich and famous. There's a whole bunch of people that never get any accolades or any kind of recognition who just sell their friends and say, hey, listen, if you want some of your products for free, you can become part of this organization. So they piddle around, they make $50 or $100 a month or a week or whatever it might be, just about basically the same Marco makes on his YouTube channel. But they basically do that, and they don't care about a Ferrari, they don't care about whatever. The flaw in Marco's argument is he makes the assumption that those 16 million people are all telling all of these people that are going to become rich and famous. And that, Glenn, is wrong. The ones we hear about, hold on. The ones we hear about are the ones that make the YouTube videos. The ones we hear about are the ones that have the microphone at the front of the room. the quote unquote leaders or promoters who do it wrong are the ones that tell those lies that you're referencing, and Amway basically is the cookie cutter for how to do it wrong. But the whole industry does not do it that way, which brings me right relative to Marco at an MLM conference. Now, you're right when it comes to Amway. Hats off. No contest. I agree with you 1,000,000%. I've been to a lot of those MLM meetings with Amway people. They're all the same. They're the cookie cutter. You're going to get rich. Your financial freedom. It could take you a couple of years if you needed to. Don't quit your full-time job. You're probably going to need it. Make sure you're buying all our tools. So Amway, you're 100% right. If Marco was doing a presentation about Amway, I would agree. But Marco was doing a presentation about MLM, and 16 million people don't tell a story about lifestyle, the rich and famous. The ones that make headlines do, but not everyone does. So I will disagree with you saying Marco was right if he's doing an MLM conference describing the MLM industry. If he was describing Amway, he'd be spot on. If he was describing a money game, he'd be spot on. So what Marco doesn't do is he doesn't differentiate the people that might be doing it right. Everybody does it wrong, and there's no such good thing as a live MLM. It's like rattlesnakes. They all should be dead. So
but you
I just wanted to make that.
Tell him an MLM is doing it. The big problem is you refuse to tell Marco an MLM company that's doing it right. So he can't do what you're asking him to do because you're refusing to give him the name of a company. And the other point is that
hold on. Can I address that? Can I address that? Marco's crowd is a bunch of goons and they're trolls. If I mention a company's name, they will go out there and do whatever they have to do to goon and troll that company. There's no reason for me to mention in a hostile environment anybody that's doing it right, for Marco's crowd. If we were having a conversation, meaning me and Glenn, I could have a conversation with you and give you lots of examples of companies that are doing it right. I will not do it with a hostile environment of people that will harass people that are doing it the right way, because what they'll do is they'll go out there and troll that organization, and that organization doesn't deserve to be trolled. So that's why I won't do it. It has nothing to do with I don't know. It has to do with I'm not going to give anybody, the trollers, an opportunity to go out there and attack people that are legitimately trying to build a business. No way. So Marco's going to think cowardly, pussy-ish. There is none. That's because he's an incompetent fucking asshole. You never give your enemies any ammunition to go after good guys.
But you should be able to just the company and Glenn, here's the data, here's the evidence. This is the
Glenn, last week I did name companies. Did you hear the broadcast last week?
Which one was that?
This past Saturday, did you hear that one?
I can't recall.
Because what I stated on that show.
Repeat what you said.
Yeah, what I stated on that show was Marco interviewed 2 insurance guys over the past 3 or 4 weeks. Both of them said, I think one of them said I have $150,000 a year income from just my own personal insurance sales. And the other one was like $300,000 or $400,000 a year. And then they also, actually the first guy that was making $150,000 personal sales, had a downline that was making him another $400,000. Well, always stupid narco said because he was making more from his downline than from his personal sales, that's a pyramid, and that is absolutely wrong.
That's right of that company.
I don't know what the success rate is, but my benchmark, like Peter, is not the success rate. It's do you have retail sales? Well, this guy has a lot of retail sales. You don't have to keep matching your downline income with your own personal sales. You only have to sell as much as you are personally in your own household consuming. to prove that there's free market demand. You don't have to be a super salesperson in an MLM. You just have to provide evidence that there is free market demand, and that's by selling as much as you're personally using.
All I'm asking you for, and all Marco's asking you for, is an MLM company where the success rate is higher than a 99% failure rate. And I don't think that's unreasonable. But you said, so the big point before was that not everyone's promising that you can become a multi-millionaire with time freedom from MLMs. If someone's telling you that you can earn even half the minimum wage, they are being extremely dishonest. That's misleading. That's wrong. That's lying. It's almost nobody makes even half the minimum wage. So
that's a.
I don't know where you guys put your
hold on a second. That's a totally. See, Glenn, you're bringing up totally bogus arguments. You're trying to equate running a business with an hourly wage. Like, that's a totally bogus argument. You're saying, if I would spend, like on the clock, if I punch in at 12 o'clock and I end at 2, I'm supposed to get paid for 2 hours work, and whatever I do in 2 hours. That's not the way direct sales works. Here's the reality. 95% of what you do is unproductive. The 5% what you do will give you a lifestyle that'll drive you crazy. 95% of what you do in the direct selling profession doesn't end in a cha-ching. The 5% that does can make you rich. And that's words I've been using for my whole entire career because it's true. So you're equating, and I say this politely, you're equating apples to oranges. The idea that your time is an hourly wage in direct selling is flawed, quite honestly, immature,
I'm not saying that,
quite honestly, hold on one second, absolutely incompetent argument, because that's not the way it works. Anybody knows this. If you work 20 hours to get a sale, maybe the next time you work, you can get a sale in 5 hours. Maybe you get a big sale. You never know. The idea of trying to equate direct selling to an hourly wage is made by somebody who's an employee, not somebody who understands how to run a business or to be paid on what you're worth. So, flawed argument. Anyway, so we're going to do this.
Just hang on. Let me finish that off.
I'll let you. Hold on a second. Hold on. I'll let you reply. But I got other radio shows we have scheduled. So I said an hour for this one. So I'll let you reply, and then we're going to wrap it up. And if we have to have you come back, we'll have you come back, because I think this is a healthy argument or a healthy conversation for those people who might be listening in to be able to kind of digest themselves. So back to you, Glenn.
What I'm saying is, anybody who looks at the data and can see what the average person is making, what the average loss rate is, it is unreasonable. It's not reasonable. It's not a fair thing to say to somebody that I can help you make half the minimum wage, because that is so unlikely that the person is actually going to make just half the minimum wage. Even if they do it like my dad did, full-time, non-stop, 100% commitment, the chances of that person with all the commitment, all the drive, all the energy making even half the minimum wage is highly, highly unlikely. So I stand by it. If someone tells you, I can help you make half the minimum wage doing this MLM, they're misleading you, because it's not realistic that you're going to make half the minimum wage in MLMs. You're much better off to do anything, really. You're much better off to go and gamble.
Your dad should have, somebody should have, fired your dad, quit your dad, whatever. Your dad should have quit this a long time ago, unless he's getting something else out of this that he doesn't care about relative to money. So he could be delusional.
You could help him.
Let's continue this point next week. This is a good point. Let's continue it next week.
Okay. All right, so let's do this, guys, only because, like I said, we do a lot of other radio shows, and I had this one scheduled for an hour. So, Glenn, if you're interested, we won't do this next Monday because it's Memorial Day. But if you want to come back the Monday after that, or whatever other days we figure out, we'll do that. And I appreciate you bringing this stuff up. They're lively conversations, and we are done. Glenn, you have a YouTube channel that we want to make sure people know about. So if they want to find out a little bit about what you put out, can you tell us where to find you?
Yeah, it's called MLMisFRAUD.
MLMisFRAUD, and we're going to put up a guest page for Glenn on Building Fortunes Radio, and I'll try to make the name. You'll be able to see the title of any radio show if you look under Scott Johnson and then you look for Glenn. But on Glenn's guest page, we're going to call it MLM, so that'll be like his first name, and then AKA is fraud will be the second name, because when we do guest pages, we do first name and then second name. So Glenn will not be Glenn on our guest page. It'll be MLM, and then the last name will be AKA's fraud. So it won't look good as far as the spelling is concerned, but you know what we're talking about. And then Glenn will be able to post the different things up on that, and I'll help him do that as well on the Building Fortunes Radio page. Scott, for those people who want to know your stuff, where do they find it?
Yeah, if you go to Facebook, you can see my 3 websites, my YouTube link, the link to this show, and also my email, which is stoptheamwaytoolscam@yahoo.com for those not on Facebook. But if you go to facebook.com/ScottTexJohnson, ScottTexJohnson, all one word, that's where you find all those links. And thanks again, Peter and Glenn. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Scott. We'll see you next time. Thanks,
everyone. You've been listening to Building Fortunes Radio on BuildingFortunesRadio.com. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check us out every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for the designated Building Fortunes Radio segment with Peter Mingils. Be sure to check out the BuildingFortunesRadio.com website for our featured segments. It's been our privilege to have you listen in. At Building Fortunes Radio, we wish you the success you deserve and are willing to work for. So spread the word, tell a friend, join our newsletter, and go make a difference in your world.